Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the Reconstructing History podcast. I'm Bob.
Still Kass.
And here we are. It's another cold, damp, dreary day, early spring day.
It's not that cold.
No,
I mean,
it's not that cold.
We're really spoiled. We think it's cold, and it's like 10 degrees.
But it's damp and dreary because we're in the tail end of Storm Eunice.
Storm Eunice. The wind has died down.
Oh, it was terrible. It was blowing gale 10 or 11.
Yeah, but since we don't have above ground power lines or communication lines, our power didn't go out.
Everything was fine.
The internet didn't go out.
There were some people killed, I'm sad to say, in Amsterdam. Yeah, I think a tree
fell and hit some people
and
killed them.
There were some videos of trees going over all over the country.
Oh, the soil is really sandy. It's not hard for trees to go over here. But
there was one that I saw where the tree fell over, and as it fell over, it pulled up all the sidewalk, because the sidewalks aren't like concrete slabs or tarmac, they're bricks laid on sand.
Yeah, and they're bricks without mortar between them, so that they can move.
Yep. Yeah. But it pulled it all up, and it was neat. It kind of looked like fabric. It was kind of cool. But I mean, it fell over a canal. The tree fell over a canal, so it didn't actually hurt anything. Yeah. But it was cool, like, whoa, look at that.
Yeah, and I posted on Instagram some of the pictures that I took yesterday.
Right.
We went out to walk in the woods, and it's a pine forest, and there was just like a blanket of
branches,
pine branches.
Yeah.
It was very nice to walk on because it wasn't muddy. It
smelled nice too.
It smelled very nice, but it was because the storm had taken down.
Yeah,
it
was neat. So that's how the weather is here. We hope it's fine where you are. So let's talk about the news.
Yes,
we've got things going on like we usually do.
Yes, more. Pattern revisions.
More pattern revisions.
The next one I'm going to be working on is very exciting. It's the Moy Gown.
Oh, yes.
And the Moy Gown I've wanted to redraft for some time because when I first studied it, I didn't know anything about pattern drafting. So when I started the pattern company, I didn't produce the Moy Gown until like 10 years later.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was just like, it's weird. How am I going to draft it? I didn't know what I was doing. So I made a stab in the dark, and it was the best I could do at the time. And I tried to explain it in the instructions, but it is confusing because it's confusing. Yeah. It's not a typical.
It's not straightforward.
Yeah, and quite frankly, it probably is a typical construction of the time, but we just don't do many typical constructions of the time. So it's nothing like a modern dress.
Right.
So I am completely revamping the Moy Gown. I'm adding more illustrations to explain the more difficult parts. You're going to do some illustrations.
Yeah, you're adding more illustrations.
I'm adding his illustrations because I don't draw, and I'm redrafting it and regrading it. So it should be a pattern in the next couple weeks to a month. It should become a pattern that will fit your size more closely from the get-go. Because you used to have to tweak an awful lot of things, and now a lot of more things are going to be graded. So and I'm also expanding the made to measure line as well with the things that we've upgraded, and really getting our money's worth out of the pattern software. It's going well. Also, again, if you've ordered a made to measure pattern, in February 2021, and you have not received an email from me, or it's been a long time since you've received an email from me, please drop me a line again, because I have been regularly emailing people who ordered made to measure patterns back in February to ask for their measurements, or also to ask which pattern you want. And if you don't want a pattern yet, if you don't want to decide yet, you have a coupon for it. I have your order, and I'm not going to drop your order. But I'd really like to hear from you that you want to wait, because right now I have a whole bunch of your money, and I don't know what you want me to do.
Right.
So drop me an email at info@reconstructinghistory.com if you've ordered a made-to-measure pattern, and tell me what you want me to do. If you just want me to wait, or if you want to give me some direction, let's do that, because
Let's talk it through.
I don't like just holding this.
Yeah, let's make a plan.
And not knowing what to do with it. So that's good.
Shoot us an email.
Yep.
And we'll get on it. All right, so we know about that. We've also found a bunch of other vintage patterns that we're going to be
Found.
working on.
We found them.
We found them in our archives that they were pretty much done and just needed the...
It was a thing that they were pretty much done, and I think they were pretty much done, and we moved to the Netherlands. And that was...
In 2018.
In 2018. Or possibly they were pretty much done, and then you went to visit your parents for Christmas and got stuck for 6 months. So I can't do cover art by myself.
Yeah.
So we have like, I think there's like 20.
Something like that.
25.
Well, I'm talking about the 6 that just need to be laid out.
There's 6 that it's because Kass is a lazy ass and hasn't done the damn work.
All the illustrations are done.
Yeah.
All the instructions are written. Historical notes are written.
The covers are done. The covers are made. Mm-hmm. I just haven't put it all together yet. The instructions are written. You said that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then after I do those, there's like 22 or 25 more that are like, he has to do some work and I have to do some work.
But we'll get there.
Flash has come to tell us off.
No, he's come to go to bed. Okay. But anyway.
But yeah, very exciting. And that's not all. Yeah. I mean, I've got a stack of stuff that...
Really big stack of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I have some very interesting, and this is all, what are we doing? What are we doing, Flashy?
Doggo? He's not going to get on camera again, but he's going to tell us how wrong we are.
He doesn't like when we talk. I think I raised my voice and he
doesn't like that.
He doesn't like it.
It bothers his calm.
Yes. I don't make him very calm.
No. So that's the story so far in terms of news.
Yes, so lots of new patterns coming, lots of revisions coming, and all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of good stuff.
So
all kinds of good stuff.
And the pandemic seems to be toning down here.
God, shut up. Don't jinx it.
No, I think almost all of our restrictions are going away on the 28th.
Something like that,
so that's another week. Mm-hmm. And which is very exciting. You can go to the supermarket without a mask on for the first time in a year. And you know,
Bars and restaurants. Clubs and other venues, theaters, both live and movie.
More importantly, trains without a mask on.
Not that I'm so used to it now that it just doesn't bother me.
You don't wear lipstick.
Yeah, but...
You don't wear lipstick.
So? If you have to have a mask on all the time, what's the use of putting lipstick on in the first place? Guys.
He doesn't understand. Guys wear lipstick too.
Oh, okay. I meant guys in the nebulous...
Asexual guys.
Asexual. Yins. Dudes. No, anyway, we won't get into that. Use guys. So.
Today's topic is?
Confirmation bias. Now, I happen to have the definition of it right here.
This is Bob's favorite subject is confirmation bias.
I promise I won't preach.
It really is. He's going to preach.
Confirmation bias is something that hits us a lot when you're a professional researcher. Confirmation bias is something to look out for, but it hits amateur researchers really, really hard. Here's the definition. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. So, and that's Wikipedia, but you know. It's from Brittanica.com, or Britannia.com.
Yeah, Brittanica.
Britannia, you know, the Encyclopedia. No, Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
That one.
The thing that with Brit starts with Brit.
The encyclopedia, responsible people. So, what that means is, and the way it plagues a lot of people, especially in the historical dress up and play hobbies, is you get this idea in your head. You want to portray this thing. Or you see an image of a thing in contemporaneous artwork, or an extant artifact that's part of the material record.
Basically, you come at the research with a preconceived notion of what you're going to find.
Right. I need to document this thing so that I can justify using it with my historical impression. That way of doing things is almost guaranteed to end up with a lot of confirmation bias. You have to fight that really, really hard.
Yeah.
Because what happened, okay, so you've got this thing, it exists in the extant record, we've seen it in a painting. What does that mean for your specific impression? What does it mean for a more generalized impression? Like you have the thing about the Irish kilt.
Oh, yes, yes. One of the first things I ever wrote historically was a series of articles for a local reenactor magazine, local to me, where I lived at the time, that was called The Evolution of the Kilt.
Right.
And the editor of the magazine asked me to write it because Braveheart came out, and all these boys showed up with basically plaid hip scarves on and saying, oh, they're kilts. And, so they wanted, she said, can you document the kilt for me? Can you write an article to document the kilt? And I wrote an article. I wrote 4 articles because I don't do anything small. And, I was trying to document the medieval Scottish kilt.
Right.
And there is no medieval Scottish kilt.
Not that can be documented.
Not that can be documented. And the first date that you get for a Scottish kilt of any description is a belted plaid in 1594, which is by no one's definition medieval,
no.
And certainly not contemporary, not Braveheart period.
Right.
But the one that really gets me is the Irish kilt.
Right.
Oh, there must be an Irish kilt because traditional Irish dancers, male traditional Irish dancers, wear kilts when they're wearing their traditional outfit.
Right.
So therefore, it's historically based. There must be an Irish kilt. There's no Irish kilt. But the problem with this is if you go looking for an Irish kilt, you're going to come up with sources that use the word kilt.
Right.
When speaking about Ireland. For example, on the Manners and Customs of the Ancient Irish, which is a tome that was written by O'Curry in the 1870s or 80s.
So more of an antiquarian piece than
an
a
antiquarian,
history.
and antiquarians are famous, or infamous rather, for kind of
taking liberties
with history because they didn't use...
Because they had a preconception that they wanted to support.
And so he translated the ancient Irish myth cycle it was only written down in the 6th century, but it was written down in Old Irish, and he read Old Irish, and he translated it. And there's this quote that he translated into English as his splendid linen kilt. Well, if you're reading the English translation, you go, oh, well, there's a kilt, and it's in the 6th century in Ireland. There were kilts in the 6th century in Ireland. But if you read it in the Old Irish, and I do, I don't read Old Irish, to be fair. I read modern Irish. But it's very similar. It's like reading Shakespeare in English. So, if you read one, you can decode the other. The word used for kilt is not fila, which is the Gaelic word for kilt, or anything that modern Irish or Scots Gaelic use to describe a kilt.
Right.
It's lena. And lena
shirt
is the word for shirt. Modern word for shirt also meant a tunic or a dress, or so. And it also talks about his splendid linen kilt that had gold from the neck or from the hem to the top of his breastbone. So if that's a kilt, what's the kilt doing to the top of his breastbone?
Maybe they're in Boca. Like the little old men driving around Boca with
their waistbands on.
like up above their nipples.
That's an image. So anyway, and but then why? Why, if there's no Irish kilt, Kass, why do the Irish dancers wear kilts? There must have been an Irish kilt. And we find a letter from Pádraig Pearse. Pádraig Pearse, father of Irish independence, died in the Easter Rising in 1916. And he was approached because he was,
Pádraig
Pearse. And he was approached to say, what should our Irish dancers, our Irish athletes, what should they wear as the national costume? Because this is a time when Ireland was first kind of asserting its Irishness. And so he said, he looked at the garments that were housed in what was then called the Royal Museum, which is now the National Museum of Ireland on Kildare Street in Dublin. And he looked at the Kilcommon costume,
Right.
which was the only men's costume that was housed
At that time, yes.
in the 19-teens. And, you know, it's a pair of hosen and a jacket. And he said, I would prefer that we adopt the kilt of our Scottish cousins rather than run around in the garments from the Royal Museum for fear that our fellows will think we forgot to put our trousers on, because he thought they looked like long johns.
Right.
Because they're hosen, they're tight to the leg. So Pádraig Pearse, and it's, this isn't rumor. This is, we have his letter. We have this letter. And, I mean, I don't mean we have it, but the National Archives in Ireland have a copy of this letter. And I think it's even online somewhere. Like, you can go and look at it.
We'll look for it, and if we can find it, we'll put a link here.
So he said, and he was, you know, he's the one who said, this is what you should call the Gaelic Football League. And, you know, he was the one who had all these, he was an educator, so he had all these great ideas of how you should Irishize, you know, these things. And so his suggestion was that the men, as their national dress, wore kilts.
And yet you'd be surprised just how many otherwise responsible researchers will still insist that the kilt is an ancient Irish thing.
Yeah. It dates to 1916.
Yeah, I mean, you were
1916
talking about the, you know, Runaway ads.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's another example of how you can find the word kilt used in the context of Irish clothing.
Yep.
But you have to be careful. The thing is, you can just go, pertinent to confirmation bias is you can go, oh, it says kilt. Look, it says kilt.
Yeah.
It says it right here. But that means you've stopped without taking the datum in its full context.
Your bias has been confirmed, and then you stop. You don't ask yourself, what do they mean by kilt?
Right. We're talking about a newspaper advertisement for a runaway indentured servant. Does the person placing the ad even know what that means? Are they talking about the Catholic school skirt, or are they talking about a dress, like a long shirt or something, like or
are they talking about a plaid, you know, cloak wrapped around the body?
Precisely.
Who knows?
But
so it's really, here's the thing. Now, I'm not a scientist. I mean, I did train as an engineer, but an engineer is not a scientist. I'm not a scientist, but I do understand the scientific method because I had to take those classes in engineering school.
And we listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast. We listened to Star Talk.
But yeah, and one of the things that this is one of the things that Brian Cox, Professor Brian Cox, is big on this, because whenever he talks about government funding science research, he wants government to fund science research. Just give the scientists some money to research everything, because the best way to do research is to look at everything and then listen to what it tells you. So the best way to do, for example, astrophysics is to look at the cosmos and find data and then figure out what that
what
data,
does this mean?
Interpret that data. A dangerous way to do research is to say, we want to look for extraterrestrial life.
Right.
Because that's bitten us on the ass a couple of times. We wanted to look for extraterrestrial life, so we're looking so hard to find extraterrestrial life that we found radio telescopes picked up stuff that the famous WOW signal that ends up being nothing related to extraterrestrial anything, or extraterrestrial life at least. Obviously, it's an extraterrestrial wave.
A healthy skepticism is something that can really help you with confirmation bias. And I'm going to out myself here. There was a time, some years ago, that, like around the time that I started with Reconstructing History, that I found myself with enough, oh, look at this schedule. I can go ghost hunting.
Oh, yeah.
There was, because at that time Ghost Hunters was very popular on the Sci-Fi Channel.
I remember that.
And there was a group in our area of Pennsylvania that had all the gadgets and all that stuff. And I talked to the guy who ran it, and I became the group's token skeptic.
Yeah. Because you don't believe in no ghosts.
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe in...
They're coming.
Wow.
They're coming. Oh my God.
No, that's an ambulance. Anyhow, it's that pursuit.
They're coming to take me away.
That pursuit is fraught with confirmation bias, because there's all these instruments that they say indicates the presence of the paranormal.
Oh, there's a cold spot over here, so there must be where a ghost was. Who made up that rule?
Yeah,
who made up that rule?
What does that? Yeah, exactly. Or that the electromagnetic force the EMF detectors going off, which means there's a ghost manifesting. What?
Yeah.
And then, like I used to do, we'd go and do the vigil. I refuse to call it an investigation because it wasn't. We'd go and park ourselves in a spooky place overnight, take all these readings that really meant nothing, and then it would be weeks before we would actually go back and talk to the client. Mm-hmm. And in that time, I would use what few research skills I have to try and come up with more plausible explanations for what's going on here. What could actually cause the EMF meter to go off? What could actually cause a cold spot? That sort of thing, which is why I only lasted about 6 months with the group and got told that it would probably be better if I stayed home, because I ended up...
They wanted a skeptic.
They wanted a skeptic.
But then they didn't want to hear what the skeptic had to say.
But my point is, everything involved with that is confirmation bias, because they deliberately interpret every piece of data to support the fact that there's some kind of ghost or spooky goblin-y thing going on at that site.
Yeah.
So
if data is not normal, then ghost.
Yeah.
And that's the only possible explanation.
And you have to. It's really, really, really hard to avoid it. I mean, God knows I fall prey to it all the time.
Yeah.
You do, I do, you do out.
Let's not pretend. When you research clothing, you're starting with a certain amount of bias.
Right.
A pair of trousers has 2 legs.
Right.
A hat goes on someone's head.
Yeah.
It sounds overly simplistic, but it's not like astrophysics where you're just like, I'm going to look at what's there and see what I observe. But because doing clothing research isn't pure science.
Even in the hard sciences, though, there can be confirmation bias that something has to explain this phenomenon that we've observed in the cosmos. So, and that's how you end up with things like the Higgs boson.
Yeah, and dark matter.
Right. Great show.
Yeah.
Love that show.
It got stupid at the end.
Yeah,
they're just like, and then let's have an episode that we don't have to spend any money on, so we'll go back to the past and be
Audie's
real
America.
Real day. No, Toronto.
Oh, Toronto. Yeah, right. Toronto.
Yeah. Canadian show, but anyway, so it's difficult. But dark matter is entirely an invention of a scientist who said, if I add up all this stuff in the universe, there's not enough stuff to get the readings that we're getting. Right. So there must be something else.
Yep.
And this something else he called dark matter. Is it matter? Is it?
And people have been searching for it ever since.
Yeah.
Which. Okay, great, but it's still an example of confirmation bias.
Well, it's an example of confirmation bias if...
It's a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah. And I am not enamored of a historical solution to solve a modern problem.
Right.
Because that's what I find a lot of people do. They say, I cannot imagine not wearing this garment of clothing, so therefore I'm going to go find this garment of clothing. Or I cannot imagine wearing this. It used to be this way with corsets. I mean, now people love corsets. Now, people are crawling all over each other to wear a corset.
The corsetry.
But back in the 1980s, and I wasn't reenacting in the 1980s, but I have heard tell. In the 1980s, none of the ladies who were doing colonial or Victorian wanted to wear corsets or stays because there was this idea that they were painful and they were harmful.
Well, they had horror stories from their mothers of girdles and stuff like that.
Yeah. So people in the 70s and 80s didn't want, women in the 70s and 80s who did history didn't want to wear them, so they didn't wear them. And they were saying, well, it has to be that not all women wore them. Because, and that's their confirmation bias. Their confirmation bias was...
that's an erroneous assumption. A confirmation bias is when they go looking for data, for resources to support the idea that not all women wore...
There's this book. It's called Rural Pennsylvania Clothing, and it is an excellent book. It's
right.
I think it was...
Yeah,
Rural Pennsylvania Clothing. It was clothing from the Chester
County.
Chester County Historical Society has a collection of 18th century clothing, and a woman, and I can't remember her name. We'll put it down here in the edit. Wrote this book and basically explained all the clothing and told you how to make the clothing. So terrific, wonderful resource, wonderful for mid 18th century
early 19th century too.
Early 19th century reenactors in southeastern Pennsylvania. Perfect resource, lovely. We loved it to death, but it only described the clothing that was in the collection.
Right.
There were no stays.
Right.
There was a group of female reenactors who used this book as their Bible, and they only wore clothing that was in the book. Mm-hmm. So they said, we don't wear stays because there are no stays in the book, and we don't believe that anyone in Chester, there's no proof they wore stays in Chester County, which is ludicrous. And I think today they have some sets of stays they might have some sets of stays in the Chester County Historical Society today. But I'm not sure. If you're in Chester County, go see.
Yeah, tell us.
Anyway, so it was really funny because there was, in the book, there are no extant petticoats, and petticoats in 18th century means skirt. So outer garments. There were no petticoats in the Chester County Historical Society, but the woman who wrote the book drew a petticoat. Mm-hmm. And put it in there, and it's really kind of, it's not an 18th century petticoat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quasi 18th century, but it has elements that are clearly made up. But she drew a petticoat and put it in the book, and I said, thank God she drew a petticoat and put it in the book, or these women would be running around with short gowns on and nothing on their bottoms.
And that's.
Yeah, but can you imagine? We're only going to do what's in this museum, and the museum.
I don't think that's so much confirmation bias as just crappy research. But
they didn't do research. They took one book. They took a book as their Bible.
Yeah.
And that book wasn't written. The book wasn't written to be...
It is confirmation bias in that they refused to countenance any other sources of information that disproved their closely held belief.
Yeah, because don't get me wrong, Rural Pennsylvania Clothing is a terrific book. It doesn't purport to tell you every garment that was worn in rural Pennsylvania at the time. It just describes
what's in the collection.
What was in the collection. But these people took it as the Bible of Pennsylvania clothing in rural Pennsylvania. And so they had this bias. And bias is just,
it can be tough.
Really hard to avoid.
If you really marry yourself to a concept, it can be really hard to avoid anything that invalidates your deeply held belief.
If they pull Celtic knotwork embroidery out of a bog in Ireland,
you'll go through the roof. You'll go, because for years she said...
It didn't happen!
They didn't embroider that Book of Kells shit on their on their clothes.
I'm pretty safe to say they didn't embroider the Book of Kells shit, but yeah. But anyway.
But the important thing is, you're not going to argue against that evidence if it comes up.
If the evidence comes, and it's happened a couple times in like the last 20 years, where evidence has shown up and I've gone...
Ah, shit.
Well, would you look at that?
That's a quote.
He's talking about
That's a quote.
Yeah.
Shit.
So my friend was going through Runaway ads, because when
yeah.
you do 18th century reenactment, Runaway ads are a really good source of figuring out what the common person wore.
Yep.
Because so much of surviving garments are upper class people's garments, and so to find out what common people wore in the
Runaway
Americas.
was wearing.
Yes, there's a book. I don't know if you can get it anymore. I think it was only a small print run, but it was called
Had on when.
Had on took with her.
Ah, okay.
Had on took with her.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And it was from Runaway ads. So if you were indentured to someone and you ran away, you broke a contract and your contract needed to be paid out. Mm-hmm. So basically, they would put an ad in the newspaper and say, this person has broken their contract. They were last wearing this. They were last seen here, and they were going in this direction. Please, if found, return them to, so that they could either fulfill their contract or
whatever.
Go to jail, because basically they broke a contract. So, and because they're common people, like apprentices and stuff like this, that kind of working class level, this isn't someone who has a ton of resources. So chances are, if they took it or they were wearing it when they left,
they've still got it on.
It's their only clothing.
They left with the clothes on their back, literally.
So we're looking through these things. My friend and I are looking through all these Runaway ads and stuff and seeing what these people are wearing. And he comes up with this one in the Boston area, in a broadsheet in the Boston area, that says, 2 Irish lads ran out on their contract, were wearing linen kilts.
Quote, shit.
Oops. So, at that point, I'd been ranting against Irish kilts, linen kilts, like every permutation of this. Kilts in America in the 18th century, just all of these different things that I had been ranting about and saying there's no proof of that. There is no proof of that. But here's this thing, and it says they're 2 Irishmen wearing linen kilts. And what do you do with that? Do you know what I did with it? I copied the text. I went on an email group, big email group of 18th century reenactors that we all participated in. And I posted it. And I said, look, guys, I'm eating my hat. And, it takes.
Turns out crow tastes like chicken.
Yeah. I would never eat crow. They're too intelligent.
It's true.
Yes. But crow tastes like chicken. Yeah. I mean, when something like that happens to you, it's incredibly embarrassing, but you have to go,
the responsible,
we can look at that.
The responsible researcher accepts it. The responsible person accepts it, because confirmation bias, we're stepping a little bit off outside of our lane here, but it also exists in discussions in public policy. And we don't like to accept things that we think we reasonably arrive at and which jive with our preconceptions and our prejudices. There's that famous meme where the person one says, you can change people's minds arguing on the internet if you give them enough evidence to back up what you say. And then person 2 says, yeah, but these studies says that doesn't actually true. And person 1 says, well, I believe it'll still work.
Yeah. It's hard to change your mind.
Yeah.
When you, and especially if you've shot your mouth off.
Yeah.
It's really hard to go, oops, screwed up.
Yep.
Oopsie.
Oops.
But
my bad.
I mean, there's always, when new information comes in, it may take you aback.
Yeah. It may be embarrassing as hell.
It may be embarrassing as hell. I mean, it definitely will change your worldview if you're really vested in that.
I'm taking a look at this to make sure I didn't hear anything or didn't miss.
But, I like to think about, do you remember way back in the day when we thought dinosaurs were lizards?
Oh,
We thought dinosaurs were cold-blooded reptiles. And then all of a sudden, Professor Bob Barker comes along.
Yep.
And he says, no, chickens. They're chickens.
Yep.
And now, who of us doesn't look at a dinosaur and see a scaly, huge chicken? I mean, but before he was driven out of his profession. He couldn't get a job in a university for like 10 or 20 years.
Oh, it's been a while, yeah. It was a while.
And then everyone went, hey.
Well, the old guard died off.
Yep.
The people who insisted he was off his nut died out or retired.
Yeah.
And enough undergrads came.
Yeah, and I mean, same thing with Einstein.
Yep.
And I mean, Einstein came in and went, yeah, Newton's right, except if you're traveling at the speed of light, because Newton didn't really perceive speeds that high. Or, you know, the boys, the young boys, I forget what you call them, the young gentlemen in England at like University of Manchester who came up with quantum theory.
Yeah,
they were all like 24 years old. And everyone goes, well, if you understand quantum, you don't really understand quantum. But they came up with something that sounded ludicrous to anybody else, but you know, their calculations prove it. But if you're, particularly if your career, like, I mean, you know, us, like if a Irish kilt or Celtic network embroidery comes along.
Well, it's easy for me. I don't have a reputation to trash.
Yeah,
so.
but I mean, I'm a pattern maker. I mean, ultimately, an Irish kilt's coming along, and there's an Irish kilt. I'm like, oh, can I make a pattern for it?
Yeah, right.
I'll make a pattern for it because I make patterns.
Yeah,
and that's what I do. But if you know your academic reputation is based on you saying this doesn't exist, and you've got multiple books and you're the head of a department or something, it's really, really hard for you to go, oops, I was wrong, even though
there's no good way to go, shit, in a peer-reviewed journal.
Yeah. And so that's hard, but it's necessary.
When you boil all the bullshit off it, here's a good way to avoid it as much as you can. Even in what we do with clothing research or historical research, we follow the scientific method enough to establish a hypothesis.
Yes, we
posit a hypothesis, and then we test that hypothesis in order to prove it. That is where confirmation bias can creep in.
Yeah.
Because you can go both ways. You can ignore evidence that disproves your hypothesis, or you can put too much weight on evidence which kinda, sorta proves your hypothesis, but not really. So if you can keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and proof is so difficult.
It is.
Especially when you're dealing with clothing. You say, we can prove this existed.
But then you have to interpret it in the proper context, and the farther back you go, the less likely it is that you're gonna have any freaking clue. So you're going to end up with, ritual purposes.
Yeah, there's one thing, I vaguely remember it, so I might get it wrong, but it's a good example, even if I do get it wrong. There was a ring on a thong that was found in these graves. I can't remember where the graves were, but this entire graveyard that they found of these prehistoric people all had a ring on a thong. And of course, an archaeologist doesn't know the exact purpose of something. They
rituals.
It's rituals. I mean, it's a joke, but it's not a joke.
We used to joke about it on Time Team. You'll always see Phil Harding be like, "Oh, looks like we got something for ritual purposes here." Because
I mean, it's really kind of just a code word for we don't know what that's
exactly.
For. But they were saying, could it be a religious symbol? Could it be a religious symbol? Because everyone had one on their belt. Like every skeleton had one on their belt. Is it a rosary? Is it a religious
so what was it?
medal? They handed it to a guy who made traditional bows and arrows, and it was an arrow straightener.
Nice.
It's a ring.
Yeah.
You take it off, you carry it with you all the time because you never know when you need an arrow.
Yeah.
You find a twig to make an arrow out of, a young sapling, and you run the ring down the sapling to make sure it's
nice
straight.
And smooth and straight.
And then you put it back.
Yeah.
It's walking around. It's walking around with the chatelaine on with your scissors hanging off of it. It's a pair of scissors.
But you got to be careful about things like that. You got to be careful about things that are ritual purposes. The thing that people are making fun of lately in archaeology, I'm given to understand, is fertility symbols. They're dildos. Like there'll be this honest to God stone dildo.
Yeah.
But you can't put, it's a sex toy in a peer-reviewed journal. So it's a
fertility symbol.
It is a fertility symbol.
Like they put it on their mantelpiece.
Yeah.
And put flowers around it. Or
right,
something.
right.
I mean,
no.
maybe they did.
Yeah, I don't know. They probably had it in the the Neolithic equivalent of the bedside table next to the spare batteries. I mean, come on. It's a dildo. But so, yeah, I mean, all right, here's an object lesson. Here's a book that if you want to deal...
You love this book.
I do.
I know what he's going to say because he loves this book.
I love this book because it opened up my mind to these possibilities and just how badly I had been putting confirmation bias on things that I was trying to interpret. Motel of the Mysteries.
Mm-hmm. It's hysterical.
And put a link
It's
to
hysterical.
it in the show notes.
It's a good one.
It's a graphic novel in black and white and an object lesson to us all. Shut up, it's a graphic novel. But it's an object lesson to us all and in how we interpret material culture. We have to be really, really careful or else we'll look like idiots. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, it's not about just being responsible. That's great. I don't want to look like a jerk.
Yeah.
So, there you have it. Confirmation bias, historical clothing, stuff like that. What else? Nothing? Well, you know the routine. Like, subscribe, ring the little bell.
Yep.
And
links to everything we talked about today
show
in
notes.
the show notes. Mm-hmm.
If you want us to talk about something, you have an idea, an interesting topic, comment, send us an email, info@reconstructinghistory.com.
Yep.
And that's it. So we'll see you next time, ladies and gentlemen.
Bye.
Bye.